a lot these days about work-life balance and prioritizing our lives. And now we have a novel just out set in Toronto all about that. Kate Hilton is the author, and welcome to What She Said.
Thanks so much, Kate. It's great to be here.
Now, your book's called Just Like Family, and the setting will sound very familiar to our listeners. Set the stage for us.
So the book is set primarily at Toronto City Hall, which is the present-day work context of Avery Graham, who's the heroine of the book. It's also set in past scenes in New York City and in some past scenes in Ontario cottage country. So the present-day work scenes, though, which I think are in some ways the most interesting part of the book, are set in City Hall. Avery Graham is the chief of staff to a charismatic Toronto City mayor, and chaos and humor ensues.
Yes,
chaos? How much chaos?
Well, I think people who live in Toronto can easily imagine how much chaos can spill out of City Hall. In this case, they are in the middle of a huge waterfront redevelopment, and there are, of course, many stakeholders involved in that project and lots of people with different ideas about how it should go forward. And in the meantime, of course, political crises do come and go at City Hall, and so there are some personal issues that find their way into work and work issues that find their way into home, and that's sort of the crux of the book.
So is this, would you say, the crux of the story is behind every great man is a great woman kind of thing?
I think that's one takeaway on it. I was actually, in a more general way, interested in exploring the idea of relationships at work, and in particular, work marriages, quote unquote work marriages. I think traditionally we think of almost a traditional work marriage, which is a woman behind a strong man. And certainly I think that's a pattern that goes back a long, long way to male executives with female executive assistants supporting them. And even I think funny old stories about real wives and work wives managing a husband's life in the office. But I think a more modern take, which I'm exploring in this book, is a female executive, often a more junior executive, someone who's sometimes been mentored and hired and brought up by a male executive, and how that power dynamic kind of works itself out over a long work relationship.
And did you reach a conclusion?
Well, the fictional conclusion here is that, we all have to grow up and we all have to find our own way of defining ourselves, not in relation to a man in the office, as in life, but I think those relationships play out in a lot of different ways in the workplace. And I think the takeaway for all of us in modern workplaces is to try to think about how to keep work in its proper place in relation to our personal lives.
So how do you decide where to place your loyalty then? I mean, it is tricky. I mean, who wins when personal and professional loyalties conflict?
I think it's a great question, and I think that the trite answer, of course, is that everyone has to resolve that in his or her own way. But I think the reality is that there is a serious cost to putting work above all else, and the people in your personal life are going to be way less willing to tolerate that, as perhaps they once were in a traditional family setup where the man went to work and the woman governed the homestead. And if he came home and had a scotch and went to the basement, well, that's just because dad was tired at the end of the day. I mean, those days are gone. And so I think all of us, as women have more senior roles in particular, need to think about how do we preserve and protect a place for our friends and our families and even our own non-work selves in that context.
Well, in fact, Avery in this novel is juggling 3 husbands.
She is, and that's where
Busy woman.
A little spicy comes from that.
Well,
yes.
Because it's very reflective of the modern world.
It is. So she has a starter marriage in her history. She was married young and probably ill-advisedly in her 20s. And that marriage failure looms large in her present-day decision-making. She has a long-term partner whom she's not married, but who would like to change that and has proposed to her at the beginning of the book. And then, of course, she has this long-standing work marriage. And each of these relationships cast a long shadow over all the other relationships. And so it makes it very difficult for her to make it what should, for many people, be an easy call. I've been with someone 14 years. He wants to get married. Okay. Not an easy decision in her case.
Do you think that men who may be in the same position just don't feel the same pressure?
I would have said that was true, and I think in many cases that is still true, particularly in the context where you have children involved. And so anecdotally, and I would say also I think there are lots of studies to support my anecdotal position on this, female workers with children at home feel that pressure very intensely and in ways that I think men seem to find it easier to keep home at home and carry on with their day and not worry too much about the dentist appointment and the call from school and so on.
They can compartmentalize very easily.
They
right?
seem to be much better at that than women. But in this book, Avery doesn't have children, and that was a deliberate choice because I was very interested in how women cope with those pressures without the very important and overwhelming factor of maternal guilt, which I think gets in the way a lot of these conversations. And with that off the table, I think certainly in Avery's case, and she's fictional, but she represents lots of people, the pull into work is incredibly powerful for her too, and the difficulty in setting boundaries is for her a real challenge in much the way it would be for a man in the same situation.
I'm kind of fascinated. I mean, you have an English degree from McGill, a law degree from the University of Toronto. You've worked in law, higher education, public relations, and major gift fundraising. How did you get from all that to writing the book? This is your second book with a third on the way.
It's true. Well, I suppose my parents would say I've had a lot of difficulty deciding on a career. So that's one analysis that's probably legitimate. But, I think the thread has always been writing. So I've always worked in jobs where being a good writer was an absolutely essential part of the toolkit. And I have sort of a relentless curiosity. I mean, I guess I get bored easily. So I've found lots of paths along the way that have allowed me to really pursue an interest in communications and writing. And in the early days, I've always wanted to write a book, and that was kind of my midlife passion project, which has turned out very nicely, so I'm happy for that. Much more fun than running a marathon, which lots of my friends did. I had always wanted to write a book, but in my 20s, it really did seem like quite an irresponsible path to go down. And so law school, as so many of us did at that time with liberal arts degrees, law school seemed like the responsible choice. And so I did that. And it took me in lots of interesting directions, but it ultimately wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I started working at the university in legal education, and that took me to lots of other places inside the university, like fundraising, for example.
Now, do both books focus on women's issues?
Yes, they do. The first one, which was called The Hole in the Middle, much more directly so, because that book was really a book about the challenge of work-life balance and having kids and being a working mom. This book I actually think has much broader appeal because I to my mind, these are not especially gendered problems. That is to say, the problem of how we think about the place work should occupy in our life and the issues of where we think our loyalty is best placed. The protagonist is a woman, certainly, and has, and there are lots of, tart feminist observations, let's say, over the course of the book. But I do think this book, particularly in light of the political context, will appeal to male readers just as much.
So any hints about the third?
The third is a divorce comedy called Better Luck Next Time.
Of course.
But it's not about me.
Good. Now, Just Like Family.
That's what she said.
That's what I always say.
So Just Like Family is the name of this witty and insightful novel about juggling the demands of three husbands. And you are going to give our followers two copies of the book are available. That's so nice of you. If you are interested, just all the details will be up on our website. That is whatshesaidtalk.com. So that's great. And the book is available everywhere
books are sold.
Well, Kate Hilton, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
This is What She Said. Stay with us.